everybody. We are back. It is Toasted, the podcast, episode 3. I'm Margie Wright, and
I'm Nick Farnoli.
Alrighty, and we are here for the second part because we really didn't get to the whole story of Nick, or at least the story that we're going to be telling this time. So first, thank you for joining the conversation. We want to always start out with some thank yous. So thank you for joining the conversation. It's really important that this is something that is a part of the collective. That's really what's important to us, that it isn't just you listening to us, although it's you listening to us, but it is the feedback, the responses that help us to go forward. And we're really excited because we've got some guests lined up. So you get to hear more about the conversation. So for us, this is really about inviting you into the conversation. So thank you for being part of it. And Nick, I don't know if you have any specific shout outs that you wanted to give before we get going.
No, just again, every week it's kind of surprising to me the number of people who will like reach out and like they'll shoot me a text like, "Hey, you said this thing on the podcast. Is that true? Or what do you think about this?" And so like now people are just kind of like, shooting ideas or thoughts, and it's kind of cool because like you're on your way to work or whatever, and like your normal job, but then like you have this podcast life about failure, this discussion about failure going on. And it's kind of nice to know that it extends beyond the 30 minutes that we spend recording it. And then, even the 2 hours it probably takes me to edit things down and upload them. So it's just a really nice, and I appreciate all the comments, everyone who reaches out. That's awesome. I did want to just really quickly mention that I did just put episode 2 on YouTube. So if you want to access episode 2, you can do that now. And if you've already listened to it, you already know this. So this is a little bit of a spoiler alert. But at some point, we discuss, which is a better Irish whiskey, Tullamore Dew or Jameson. Now, clearly, Jameson is the correct answer. So you can just put your answer in the comment box below the video just to reaffirm my thinking. Margie clearly disagrees, but we've been having a lot of fun, and just thank you to everyone who's listening and being so supportive, spreading the word. I think we probably need to give a massive shout out to our good friend Tracy Marchanda, who's probably the biggest prophetic voice of Toasted to date. She's done a lot of word spreading for us, and been very encouraging. So thank you very much, Tracy. We both really appreciate it.
We do. And Tracy, we love you so much. You are just a remarkable human in so many ways. And we are so excited to be able to have you as part of our podcast family, to have you as part of the conversation, and certainly to have you as a guest in short order on the podcast. So that is going to be super exciting. Yes, huge shout out. The responses and the connections are amazing. I want to give a special shout out to one of the OG fellows from Cuke College back in the day, Joe Pitcher, who sent me a really great Buffalo Bills from Twitter, a little video of Von Miller, who has he been the best acquisition for the Bills or what? I love me some Von Miller. So we had Von Miller, Nicholas like cracking up over here. So
I'm going to keep my commentary about the Bills and sports in general to a real dull, minimum.
I'm okay with that.
Thanks, Margie, for pointing out my lack of athleticism.
Not a problem. So what do our friends do, right? But Von Miller gives this great after the fumble, and he talks to this young player and just says to him all about failure. And so Joe sends this to me. He's like, "Hey, Margie, I thought this would go right with your love of the Buffalo Bills and your podcast." And I was just, those connections are so huge. And I just appreciate it so much. So thank you, Joe, for that. And if you do check out some of the Toasted things, we do have our Toasted website. We do have Toasted on Instagram as well as on Facebook. And we try to post some of these things there and give the shout outs to the people who share these things with us. Again, it's not about us. It's about the collective, and it's about community, and it's about being in this together, doing life together, and sharing in the conversation. So we are super excited about that. So Nick, we know that I am drinking Tullamore Dew because it was a little early for me on Sunday morning, and I was drinking straight coffee. So I'm kind of making up for it. So I'm sort of like on delay here. So I am enjoying Tullamore Dew, as we saw, and I want to give a shout out. And this is pretty funny that we didn't even realize we were doing this, but we are both drinking out of our Hollerhorn glassware. So shout out to Hollerhorn Distillery, who is in the process of rebuilding. If you're not familiar with Hollerhorn, which is just like the most amazing, magical place on earth in Naples, New York. Nick can certainly talk more about that, but love us our Howler Horn. We can't wait to be back there. And so shout out, drinking my Tullamore Dew out of my Howler Horn glass. So Nick, go ahead and share about Howler Horn.
Two things I want to say, actually, Margie. One is, if you do want to support the collective, and we certainly want you to support the collective, I'm going to bounce back here just for a second. We have some really nice stickers, waterproof stickers available. I'm going to get those up on the website. And also we have coasters. So if you want some toasted coasters or a sticker, we'll have those available on the website. I'm hoping sometime early next week. I have to do a little work on the webpage to get that up, but they'll be up there and ready to go. And
I just ordered the stickers and coasters. He puts it on the website. Oh.
That's right.
I just shop.
Part of it.
I shop.
Yeah. What a different podcast this would be if I shopped and you did the tech. Could you imagine?
People, don't you worry. I'm going to handle the shopping, and I will handle watching the sports and updating us on all the latest with the Bills.
Absolutely.
We'll let you do the techie stuff.
Yeah, that's safer that way for everyone, for sure. Howler Horn, though, I do want to just, they're kind of a paradigm for a lot of what we're talking about on this show. Not that they're failures necessarily, but their ability to kind of rise above unforeseen circumstances. So they're actually family too. So my brother-in-law, Carl, and my sister, Melissa, built this beautiful distillery in Naples and had a couple of really great years. And earlier this year, woke up to it burned to the ground, basically. And so they've had to kind of go back to the drawing board and think about, what it was to them to have the distillery and what it meant to the town and to all of us. And thankfully, they've realized how important it is to all of us, and they're rebuilding. So we're really excited to get back in there. And I think the world of those two, and they're working so darn hard to get that place back up and running. So really looking forward to getting back in there, getting some more live music, because now we have, we can do that now. You can go out and see live music again, and it'll be really, really great to get everything back to normal.
Yes.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that,
right?
there is no normal. We give ourselves this benchmark of normal, and there isn't. But I know, Howler Horn survived COVID. Like many small businesses had to truly survive it, and then they were starting to thrive again. With all, I'm not from Naples, so I would never pretend to be. Kelly and I call us the Canandaigua cousins, but we certainly love Howler Horn so much, and certainly the Halloween celebration with Dirty Blankets band is always. We look so forward to that. So next year is going to be, great. And I love following Howler Horn on Instagram and seeing the rebuilds. It's super exciting. So we just want to do a shout out to them, definitely. But yeah, so Nick, what are you drinking tonight? Speaking of spirits, what are you drinking tonight? Yeah.
So I mentioned this before last week that my favorite cocktail is actually Negroni. And so since I have to talk about my life, which is like everyone else, I'm sure, my least favorite conversation. I decided to make a Negroni for tonight. So this is actually, I don't even know what gin I used. I think it's a fairly cheap gin, unfortunately. And then I use Campari and red vermouth, a slice of orange. And then I try not to drink more than one of them because they're fairly strong. If you've never had a Negroni, this color right here can be very deceptive. Beautiful. Be careful. Yeah, they are beautiful. They're really strong though. And so it's kind of funny if you order one out in a bar, someone will inevitably ask you what it is, right? And they may even do it with that, like, ew, how do you drink that sweet thing? And then you give them, well, pre-COVID, you would offer a sip. I don't know if anyone even does that anymore, but when they try it, it's always such an interesting thing because Campari is extremely bitter. It's not sweet at all. And I think
I wonder what
it takes
Campari?
People.
It's very red.
It's very red. It's an Amaro, so it's actually bitter, extremely bitter. It has a lot of herbals in it, and it's a botanical blend that they put in there, kind of like gin, only maybe more even more herbaceous and less berry character. It's one of my favorite things. My sister actually took a trip to Italy, and she came back and she was all about Aperol Spritz and Negronis. So that was the summer I learned about them, and they've become kind of the family drink. And anytime I'm like, deeply introspective or ready to celebrate, or that's usually what I drink. And I think partly it is the color, because they are a lot of fun.
They're
And
beautiful.
partly it's that interesting. Actually, I'm going to take us back to failure. It's a lot like failure, right? It's kind of beautiful, sort of, but it has this like really bitter taste, So it's very grounding, very humbling experience to drink a Negroni. So I don't know, maybe that was a stretch.
I think it's a little bit of a stretch. There's something beautiful.
Yeah, probably.
At least in the moment. In the retrospect, I think there is. I do think there is, and we've touched on some of that, and we'll get to that, and maybe that is sort of the focus of this podcast.
Are we talking about Negronis or failure?
We're going to talk about both, but we'll share. I was in the what I call the good liquor store up in Blaisdell near Hamburg, and I was like, "What is this Campari? Like, I don't know what that is." So I went and looked it up, and I'm in there, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it is so bright red!" And I'm like, "What is this?" So I was interested to learn about Negronis. I know earlier Nick and I were texting, and he said he was going to do the Negroni, and I was like, "Whoa!" But I thought it was sweet. Like when you look at it in the bottle, it looks like it's like going to be super sweet, almost like a Shirley Temple on steroids. And I was just like, not for me, but herbal and all that. I might actually be interested sometime to have you make me a Negroni and try it. But I think
that's the way to do it. Yeah. Well, actually, I was going to mention this. Hollerhorn does like a rhubarb Negroni in the spring. Ooh. So good. That's really good. And that's what I would have gotten. But I'll be honest with you that my day was so hectic that I stopped and grabbed the first thing I could grab. So Sometimes that's the way we roll.
Sometimes the way we roll. So speaking of rolling, let's roll forward, talking about rising through. And we're excited because we've had a few different things that have been really neat. And that as people reaching out about that phrase, rising through, and we love that people are connecting with it and using it. And that helps us to know that we're on the right track here. So thank you. And the other thing is people, when they're reaching out to me anyway, I can't speak for Nick, but for me, it's they're ending it with cheers. And I love that. I love that we're embracing the idea of doing cheers at the end and toasted. And that's just such a celebratory feeling. So thank you for that. So you talked about, you tried to do the Negroni stretch thing with the failure being bitter. But then we talked about the beauty that can come at the end. So I don't know if that's where you want to go with this or if there's something else you want to start the conversation with. But Nick, start the conversation off.
Well, that's a great segue. I don't know that I'm going to meet the expectation of the beauty at the end necessarily, but I do want to talk about this idea of. Yeah, right. I mean, in this episode, we not get there. I don't know. We'll see. And sometimes, and this is one of the things about the podcast that's powerful for me personally. And that I invite other people to do. And part of the reason why we need to have a dialogue around failure is because so many times I sit here and I talk and then I leave and I feel so much better just having talked about it, right? To open the dialogue, I think is oftentimes that's the therapy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So who knows where I'll end up by the time we get done with this conversation, Margie, right? We'll just have to see.
That's what's exciting about it. Buckle in, people. Buckle in.
I do want to maybe talk about the stacking of failures that sometimes happens. And so I was reminded of this early this year because a friend of mine was going through some stuff and really struggling with kind of a not great relationship and was thinking about leaving it. And we were talking and I said, hey, I just feel like I need to tell you something. And that is that you're at this moment where you feel like you've got a lot on your plate and you're super stressed out and you need to leave this relationship and you really can't think about anything else. And so that's the moment when all the other stuff happens. And you know what I'm talking about, right, Margie? So this person sat back and they looked at me and like, what are you talking about? Because when you're not in that sort of that heightened level, when things aren't already kind of falling apart, I don't think you notice the number of things that come at you on a daily basis, right? So for me, I think I've mentioned this before, but I started out as an English teacher, was pretty happy in the classroom. But I mean, like, if we're being honest about what a teacher makes, and particularly a first year teacher or even a first 5-year teacher, like, it's really tough. And I had 3 kids and I really needed to raise a family, and support them. And so, the idea of becoming an administrator was appealing to me because, I mean, in part, there was this additional salary that could help us do all sorts of things, like pay bills, which,
That's a good thing.
there were times when that just wasn't happening. And,
Yeah.
And I think you take a lot of cues from parents, and like, I had watched my parents do lots of stuff I knew they didn't want to do just to sort of support us. And so I thought I was kind of doing my duty, and I became an administrator, and felt like I was going in the right direction. Spent a couple of years as an assistant principal, did really well. I was promoted to principal, and I think I was promoted. Well, I was made an acting principal in April, and then received the full position July 1. July 7th, I had a conversation with then she was my wife, now she's my ex-wife, about our marriage kind of basically falling apart. And right out of the gate, right? So, like, brand new position, super stressful job. And I kind of felt this strangeness about the job, right? So, like, that was the start of it, right? That was like the first thing. Yeah. So that's the ship rocker, right? We're like, okay, wait, my reality isn't maybe as solid as I thought it was.
Yeah. So, and you're trying to get your sea legs on just that. Yeah, your focus is like, okay, whoa, let me get my sea legs here. Something is right. I got to find my balance because things are moving that I didn't expect to be moving. Yeah. And your focus is there.
So that was kind of, what's that?
And your focus is there on balancing this. And you're not noticing things coming, or, as you said, stacking. You don't see the next one coming because you're focusing on, like, I need to figure this one out.
Right. And that's exactly what started happening. And so, so kind of with this new job, it's super busy, kind of knowing right out of the, right at that point, like, probably heading towards a divorce, but maybe not, trying to work through some stuff. And certainly I was open to the idea of trying to do that. And we did. We spent a whole year in counseling and really tried hard to, like, make that work. And, the following March, it was just like this. Oh,
no, pause.
Yeah.
So, okay. So now, getting back to your whole concept of stacking, you have a new job July 1 that you're trying to get balance on. And now 6 days later is this other major thing. So now you have basically a foot on the dock and a foot on a moving ship. And you're like, okay, which one do I give my attention to? Or maybe it was 2 ships that, you feel yourself that you're like, I'm trying to work through this and give my earnest effort in saving, my marriage and therapy. But now I also am trying to give my earnestness to this new position, which is, by the way, untenured. And that's a very precarious position. If you're an administrator, it's not the same rules as teachers, we learned. And so you have these 2 competing things that are requiring more than your 100%. Oh, and 3 boys you're raising.
Right. And then on top of that, actually, and I forgot that previous February, over February break, we moved into a new house. So new house, we had bought a house, more or less decided that if we didn't decide at that point that our marriage was falling apart, we at least acknowledged that we had a serious problem. And then, and this new job. So all of that, right? But that's actually not even the beginning of it, right? So that those things kind of, they set the groundwork is shaking a little bit, right, in motion. I love your analogy, 1 foot on the dock, 1 foot on this boat. You're trying to figure out where you spend all your time and your energy. And And the other thing, the other thing to say is like being an administrator is not a 9 to 5 job, right? So even when you're home, you're not home. That's not a thing for school administrators. And so it was a really hard. It was hard shift.
Yeah, and it's different depending on what
And,
type of administration you're doing.
Right. Yeah. And so, so trying to, be as active as I can and present as I can, in the new position, and also kind of simultaneously attempting to patch or hold together a marriage. I get an email from a friend, a close friend, that said, my cancer's back and I'm not doing great. And so I texted him, immediately, and I was like, hey, what's going on? And he had previously had melanoma, metastasized melanoma. I'm not a cancer expert, so I might be, getting that slightly wrong, but I was, this is a guy who I had spent a couple of years working with in a wine cellar. We'd become pretty good friends. He was a mentor for sure in a lot of ways, dad of 5 kids. And he was like, it's not going great. And so I've got like that on my mind. I've got, the marriage stuff and this cancer thing. And so I spent my first year as a school administrator really struggling through those sort of personal events and trying hard to just like not show them, and trying hard to kind of get through. And sometimes I was successful, and other times I'm not so sure I was as present as, you might have been otherwise. And then let's see. So that was that May. We finally, the following May, we said like no more, decided to get a divorce, and my friend progressed, his cancer progressed. And he died that summer, that 2 days, about 2 months earlier. I'm a little rough on the timeline. Maybe it was a month earlier. Another local winemaker who I had mentored with was killed in kind of a bizarre accident in Naples too. And so my point here isn't necessarily to recount all the horrible tragedies of that year, but to say like the stacking of things, the stacking of failures or trauma or whatever is a very real thing. And I'm not sure that we do a very good job of talking people through that, or even of acknowledging that it exists. And I think in part because we don't want to believe that more than one horrible thing could happen to you. How could that, how could the world be that unjust? And I think more often than not, it's the case that these things do happen that way, or at least that we perceive them to come in clumps. And maybe that's our own rationalization of awfulness. That's the official scientific term, awfulness.
It is. I've seen it used before and referenced. I think that, sometimes it does go that way, where the stacking, where you're just like, and sometimes it's you, and sometimes you're looking at your friend or your loved one and you're just like, I don't even know what to say. My God, could there be one more thing that happens to you? And we've talked about that before, what it's like when it's you versus what it's like when you're seeing somebody who you love and want to support and don't know how to do that. But it's true. And each one affects the other, because you can't press pause on your career. You can't press pause on the very real needs of the district. And honestly, as a school principal, that is, when school is in session, you have to be there. And when things are happening, they're happening in real time. You can't press pause for being upset or sad or getting a text from somebody telling you something, or a friend of a loved one, or whatever it might be, an ex saying the divorce papers are ready. And you're like, great, I got to go down and handle this behavior issue, Yeah. And it's those are all real things. And you have this building of people and children depending on you. And I mean, this might sound a little critical and cold, but I'm going there. And it's that in retrospect, they're like, we didn't realize you were going through it, or maybe you shared and we even did know you were going through it, but my competing need right then and there was more important than my empathy for what you had. And when I look back on it, I'm sorry, because again, as they're seeing their need, which they're supposed to advocate for their students. Each teacher is. We were both teachers. We know what that feels like, but we don't know what it feels like to be the principal when you have 60 different needs coming at you and there's one of you. And you're trying your best to reach all of those at the same time that you are getting a text from your kid. Mom, I'm going to meet with a Marine recruiter. And I'm like, hell you are without me, And so you're just like, okay, how do I deal with this and go down the hall and take care of whatever, And so it is those competing things that all of us have, whatever it might be, they're there. And when it starts to stack in those ways and you can't press pause on anything and all of them are happening in real time. And as far as I know, we can't split ourselves into multiple beings to handle those. But we also can't split our brain and emotion from what's happening and coming in and trying to process all of those things in a simultaneous way. And so whether that is like the leading up to what ultimately we've defined as a failure, if you will, I don't know, or you're going through what you perceive as, and I don't know if you do or don't, but I'm going to put words in your mouth, but with marriage is like, does divorce a failure? And now you're trying to hold on to your career. So now you're trying to navigate one while trying to hang on to another. And then your friends who you want to be there for, and you don't, I don't know. Like I said, it's just, but those things are all competing with your one sense of a brain, one sense of emotions, and one sense of real person and who you can be there for truly.
Right. And the inability, maybe it's more than any one thing being a failure. It's the inability to be present for all that's coming at you. That to me felt like the failure, right? Whatever it is. I mean, you could put, yeah. I mean, like I want to give all these things my attention, right? I want to do the best job I can do on everything. That's just how I am. But the reality is like, that's impossible when there's that many things coming at you. Like you just can't process that many things. And what is surprising to me, or has been surprising to me, is that as a observer now, like having come through all of that stuff, and then a few other things sprinkled on top, COVID-19, that was like the last thing in a long line of like kind of horrendous events. That was my last 2 years as principal was like COVID-19, right? So it's like, okay, this is just like one thing after another. And I just think talking to people, it's this like that stacking of trauma or the stacking of failures, however you want to look at it, however you want to understand it. Because I don't think there's a lot of difference between those two things, right? Traumas and because I think a lot of times when you're going through a traumatic event, the traumatic part is that you feel like a failure. And we've talked a little bit about that, but just not being present for all of those things in the way that you want to be. I like how you added that. That's really difficult. And I think everyone goes through it. And you hit on something that's really interesting is like, we're really good at having sympathy and not great at showing compassion, right? So I think that was one of the things that, in a meditation practice, and again, I'm not really super hung up on whatever you want to call your meditation practice, but for me, like just that realization that like those two things aren't the same. Compassion and sympathy are not nearly the same thing, right? Sympathy is like, oh, I feel really sorry for that person. Can I get my, right? That's the, that's not compassion. Compassion is like, maybe I could figure out this thing and come to you with a solution, or there's a million different ways we might talk about that in an organization. But
compassion is being compassion is when you like you said, it's sympathy is when you're like, oh, I feel bad about that in this third party detached way, but here's my need that I need you to fill. And compassion is like, hey, I have a need, but whoa, I know you and your character. It doesn't matter how well. The fact that like I see you showing up, I see you working your butt off, I see all that. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to try and solve this or find something else because I can tell that your load is full and I'm not going to add to that. And it's a conscious decision to say,
Right.
I'm not going to add to that. If I don't know you well enough to be able to say, let me take something, or how can I help? If I'm just like noticing going, the compassionate person responds with, I'm not going to add to something that person has clearly got enough they're dealing with. Whereas sympathy is like, wow, I deal with stuff too. Yeah, that kind of sucks. So anyway, I need the whatever. And can you get that back to me? It's
Right.
like, oh, okay, sure. Thanks. Have a good day.
I worked with one person who would almost punctuate every ask with a, well, that's what you get paid the big bucks for.
Oh.
And I thought to myself, like, what a horrible way to look at the world. Like, I actually felt really bad for this person. Like that's how you measure humanity. Like, you could have this job, go get your, get your certification.
Yeah.
Do it. I'm not stopping you. I'll support you. I mean, the fact that like it's okay to I don't want to say abuse because that'd be a strong word, but to be less compassionate to your boss because they make more money than you is a really strange way to look at the world, in my opinion.
It is. And that, my other favorite was the old, like, hey, Margie, do you have a minute? And I rarely would ever say, actually, I really don't. I want to be able to honor whatever it is you're about to tell me. And right now, I just really can't. Oh, all right. So anyway, okay. Well,
yeah.
Clearly it's about you and not about me.
If you had a minute.
That was just the opener.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I just think, but I think again, like, opening up a dialogue around that, I'd be interested if folks have that experience. Certainly, reach out. You can, let's see, how do they reach out to us? You could send an email to toastedthepodcast@gmail.com. It'd be interesting to know if you've had those experiences. And maybe include in that email whether or not you'd want us to share those on an episode or not, because I certainly wouldn't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. And I'll put the email address and the website for Toasted in the show notes for this episode. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
so that's a little bit more about me.
Yeah. I think that the idea of the stacking can't be valued or underestimated, because the weight of those things, and it's just so, you think sometimes, especially if, like, for example, the decision to become whatever, to shift into whatever new position you're shifting into, or to say like, okay, we're going to go forward with divorcing, or what, you pick one of those things. For me anyway, I took stock of my life. I have this sense of like foolishness that let me get my ducks in a row, so I get the ducks in a row. And then what I don't know is that there's a windstorm coming to blow all my ducks out of the row, because I chose to make this decision, or to put something in motion, because I thought that this set of variables was going to become, more of a finite set of facts, and that they wouldn't become variables anymore. And instead, just the opposite happened. It was like, whoa, I never would have done this if I had known this would then. And you're just like, you're stuck with that space. And that's a very scary, hard thing to do, especially if you're, more type A like Nick and I. Sorry, every scripture with me.
Wait, am I type A?
Kind of.
I didn't know I was type A.
Sorry, kind of, yeah.
I think one of the things that I just want to say, and this is probably, and we were actually kind of mentioned this already, Margie, in our pre-show meeting, is that
was hilarious, by the way.
all of that stacking. This is I'm gonna get. I think I have a way to get to beauty, but I have to go somewhere first.
Okay. I
think it's important to say that, like, all of this gets pretty serious, and if we're being honest, I think Margie and I would both say it took us to some pretty dark places, and I think that's something that's okay to understand, that, like, if you're there and you're at that dark place, you're not alone. Like, there's lots of people who've been there. And please, whatever you do, understand that down the road, that dark place may lead you someplace interesting and even better in some cases. And so I would say that I wouldn't be here on this podcast had I not gone through all of the stuff I went through, because in the process of all of that stuff, I met Margie, and I met our friend Chris Sauke from Naples, who was a principal, and we put together this kind of interesting, trio of terror, or whatever you want to call it. We had a lot of fun. It wasn't really terror, actually. It was good stuff.
Yeah.
But I think, and I look at what I'm doing currently right now at whatever time it is, and I'm realizing all those stacked events, all that horrible stuff led me here to this sort of beautiful moment where I get to talk to people about things that have happened to me, and hopefully inspire you to see that whatever dark moment you're at, it's not going to last forever.
It's not. And don't suffer alone. Don't.
Does that count as beauty?
It is. It absolutely counts as beauty, because that is, that's that rising through. That's when the sun comes up, and that's when the dawn breaks, and that's when the darkness starts to abate. And those things are all critical, because there are times when it did not feel that way. And, and like Nick said, we always kind of like talk ahead of time, and you'd think that we'd have things really planned out, but no, it doesn't happen that way. But no. That those dark places, they're scary, and they can scare you to think that I didn't think I'd be in that dark spot, but do not suffer alone. There are a million different helplines you can reach out to. You can, it's just, it's the kind of thing where I remember thinking and I shared before in the different podcasts, those 3 things, do 3 things. Sometimes it was a matter of like, get through this hour. And distract yourself. Did a lot of walking, a lot of hiking, like I've shared before. Even if it's just putting on some music and closing your eyes, listening to music. If it's sitting in silence, get through the hour. Then you can get through the next hour and the next hour. And I remember talking to a friend. It was both of our first Thanksgiving, not married. In this divorce space, our children were not pleased with us. My children are adults, but that first year, my son was deployed, so he wasn't even in the country. And, my daughter was at the time not speaking to me, and that I didn't expect. So all this is going on, and he was in the same situation, and both of us had always hosted Thanksgiving, and so here we were. He was in an apartment, I was in this little townhouse. Neither one of us were in our homes. We weren't hosting. Our families really didn't know what to do, because they were like, they always come to our house, and it was just this space of like, what do we do? Like, I hadn't considered Thanksgiving, and so, and of course that's the beginning of all the holidays. And we were both just sitting there, and I remember him saying to me, you know what, it's 24 hours. And I was like, what? And he was like, we can get through 24 hours. I was like, okay. And he goes, what are you going to do? And he goes, let's make plans. And so I'm like, okay, well, and we weren't in the same town. And so I remember thinking like, well, what am I going to do for these 24 hours? And so kind of to shift the narrative rather than Thanksgiving. What am I going to do to Thanksgiving, or fill in whatever that important event or day is? What am I going to do for these 24 hours? And that was something that helped me to take the weight off of the kind, some of it was that guilt we talked about. Like, this is what I normally provided for my family. And I liked that role. I really, really liked that role. And I didn't have that role anymore. They didn't have a space to go to. So all of a sudden you have these variables you weren't expecting stacking on one another, all on one day of the year. And, it's just, those are dark places you don't see coming. And so when that happens, you're not alone, and you can get through 24 hours. And the next day that sun comes up, that beautiful, beautiful color in the sky and the light. And you're like, I did it. Yeah. I did the 24 hours. And it doesn't matter how, but you did it. And that's worth celebrating.
I found that in a very similar way, the poem, The Lake Isle of Innisfree, that last line would run through my head like a mantra. And I'll go there and peace comes dropping slow, or something to that effect. Right. And I remember thinking like, I'd be walking and thinking like, peace comes dropping slow, peace comes dropping slow. And like, and then eventually you're like, oh yeah, okay, I got there.
You got there. And that is worth it here,
this
right?
episode, that's yeah.
Yeah.
That's worth a cheers. So
That's right. This is how we end our
all of
episodes.
you.
And we are out of time. To all of you, to the collective, to our joining our conversations, Nick to your Negroni, to me, to my Tell 'em We're Due, and to all of you, cheers.
Cheers. Bet that Tullamore dude would be better if it was Jameson. And on that note, folks, have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.